speaker is John Coelho, and John is the enterprise global leader spanning clinical research and medical affairs research and development with assignments in the US, Europe, and Asia. John has held senior leadership roles in Pfizer, Merck in the US, and Sanofi in Paris. Currently, John is the global head of medical strategy and informatics for a cardiovascular biopharmaceutical firm, Amarin Corporation, headquartered in Bridgewater, New Jersey. So I'd like to have John share his insights with us at this point.
Thank you very much, Zakir, and to all the organizers, and of course, learned a tremendous amount from the prior speakers. So I'm really excited to talk to you extemporaneously about global health and the intersect with health services here, because I think we're living through a period of history which we will all look back and with some degree of regret. Of course, I think emotionally it has taken its toll, the pandemic, but also there has been sharp learning because it's forced us into a new way of living and thinking, in particular in health services. And so my plea to all of you is to take away from the 4 questions posed at the start of this discussion, what new roles have been really identified, what training and skill sets we could afford individuals, and where does this leave us in the pathway going forward in global health. So my talk, there are no slides. I like to talk, just discuss things and leave it open to questions later. This is the journey of a pandemic. Sometime around the end of 2019, coronavirus emanated from Wuhan, China. Now, we leave the reasons and rationale to how it started to epidemiologists and to history to uncover. But what was very interesting is, this is actually the 4th virus that has emanated from China. There have been viruses that have emanated from Africa, and there have been viruses that have emanated from Brazil, such as Zika. And I don't think that we should expect that these will be the last. If anything, we've seen an increase in viral spread, and particularly the degree of perniciousness and how dangerous they are, both in the infectivity and the mortality rate. Prior coronaviruses were very similar to the swine flu and to bird flu and to H1N1. This one spreading not through droplet, but through aerosols, merely through talking and close contact, and a very, very high mortality rate, almost more than 4 times or 5 times that of regular flu, really put a lot of fear in the healthcare community. And there was a lot we didn't know in terms of who the patient zero was, what would happen as a result. And I think certainly at the site of origin, there were things that should have been done that could have been done with more transparency. So when I talk about the spread of the virus, the skill sets that clearly we need in a developed world, in particular in a state like New Jersey, where healthcare, this was once the center of the healthcare universe, and is still home to many major pharmaceutical development researchers, is we I think need to now think about greater concentration in epidemiological and public health research. And this is related to how we understand and mine trends of disease spread, where they are going, what's happening, what's the chain, how they're spreading to us. And so this element of public health surveillance needs to be stronger. And so we've seen certainly a drop in the number of individuals who are applying to those programs, but public health epidemiology, analyzing data science, being able to spot surveillance through surveillance and understand those trends is certainly a core skill I encourage we take home and encourage these students to really get involved in and interested in. A second area, once the virus spread over to Europe, Northern Europe, and then to the coast of the United States, I think what we saw is we had a public health system that was designed for more horizontal spread of traditional viruses and bacteria. But what it was not prepared for, and I think there's an acknowledgement clearly there, and no one really was, and it's no one's fault, is the the kind of specific testing platforms we needed to understand the species of the virus. And this was a very important, very critical element to be able to scale, to drive up to scale, that the government had to partner with the private industries, such as Abbott Laboratories and Roche Diagnostics, and to create a series of platforms of reproducible, predictive PCR testing. That was really critical. Some institutions really raised the bar. Rutgers, in fact, our own Rutgers did a great job of developing a saliva test. You had to really dispense 5 cc of saliva in your mouth to be able to understand the species of the virus. It made it a lot easier in terms of testing. So those are the kinds of really key skills in diagnostics we lack, and the intersect between the private sector and the Centers for Disease Control that are now formalized. Going down further, a whole new industry of training was created with contact tracing. And I look at cities like Newark, Patterson, which did a really, really good job very early in the pandemic on contact tracing, where we now 9 months, 10 months into this pandemic, everyone knows, whether they're 8 years old or they're 80, what contact tracing is. And that's a remarkable thing, because this is a discipline that came out of nowhere as a result of this pandemic. And so the tracking and monitoring on systems using de-identified data, where we don't know who Zakir is, but we know his age, where he was, the number of people he was with, and we're able to inform that circle of 6, 7 people that this individual, you were exposed to somebody who could have been exposed to the virus, therefore you have to isolate for 14 days before the signs and symptoms emerge. Very, very important in certain counties. It's a local program that actually did very well in this. The third piece of this is in the quarantining, because once you identify people who have been possibly tested positive or are under suspicion of, then they fall into registries, because a person like myself isn't static in one county. I may be moving from county to county or state to state. And so we need to have skill sets that are able to develop electronic registries that have data that follow patients throughout the flow of life and where they go. And I'm very proud to tell you, NJII, New Jersey Innovation Institute in Newark, actually developed one, which is working with the state government to get an application for support through the CARES Act. So there are very distinct areas where technology played a key role. And I'm happy to tell you that NJII is one of the institutions in New Jersey that developed a particular solution around that. So there's another area I think that our students could really learn from and say, that's something I could do, because that's a means of understanding, mapping how patients are managed in the flow of a disease and the spread of a disease. The third area, then we move down towards where the hospitals are, and then we look at more traditional care, where there's emergency management, infection control, infectious disease specialists and nursing, and medical technology. And this is an area I think that's really important and emerging, because the medicines we found in this particular pandemic were not traditional medicines that worked. They were actually infusion medicines, dexamethasone, an old steroid that was generic, antivirals such as remdesivir from Gilead, and then monoclonal antibodies. So these drugs were infusion drugs, which were unusual, unique, and are given through infusion and not through direct oral use. And so this is what was unusual in the entire process. And so having students who understand those skills, and not necessarily in the medical field, but in life sciences, who are able to work, either become in the health services industry or learn to develop those medicines, I think are really important. And they span from virology to protein sciences. Protein sciences, I think, is one of the most important fields today that we should encourage our students to get involved in. And there are many institutions in our own state that actually offer these programs. So a PhD in protein sciences, biology is certainly very, very important from a basic sciences and advanced sciences standpoint. Moving there from the healthcare delivery, we then look at the recovery phase, which I hope we are all going to look at in 2021, when the vaccines are out, when the therapeutics are more broadly distributed as they are. We're going to look at how patients were affected as a result of this pandemic and what happened to them. So what we've learned about this pandemic uniquely is it wasn't a one-time incident or episode, but as the emerging science is coming up, we see a long-term pronounced effect. And this is what the emerging science is telling us in the leading centers of excellence in research. It's showing us that, one, that this virus behaves like almost, it causes micro clotting in various parts of the vascular system and blood vessels in the nose, the brain, the fingertips and extremities, and the heart. And so that's why you have the symptoms you do, where you have reduction of feeling and sensation there. And then also there are associated cardiovascular effects as a result of inflammation caused by this virus and the extreme anti-inflammatory reaction. So there's a dampening effect of the virus, and then there's the dampening effect of the surge in inflammation. But what we've learned, I think, is how do we help those patients recover? Because their risk factor has just gone up. So we're going to need more sophisticated monitoring for them, whether they're discharged from hospitals or in long-term care facilities, that helps understand when they may have an episode, let's say a heart attack, or may have a stroke as a result of being infected and having recovered. They are at greater risk. So that's going to take certainly systems in these new telecommunication systems for telehealth, like Teladoc and Livongo, which I think people are aware of. Prior to the pandemic, the utilization was approximately 5 to 10% across the United States. During the pandemic, it was close to 80 to 90. A lot of regular patients, for their regular metabolic care, never went to the doctor. They were afraid to because of the hospital. That caused in and of itself its own issues. But through telemonitoring, consultation, interaction with a healthcare physician, a nurse, and then the new exchange of prompts. This is prompt-based healthcare, whereby if I have a cardiovascular disease syndrome, at least I'm prompted to take my medication regularly. If I feel a certain way because I feel lightheaded, I'm prompted to make sure I'm taking my glucose and regulating my drugs carefully. So that is a company like Livongo, for instance, and Teladoc that just merged, do very well. So this is an emerging field where chronic disease management through your phone has become perhaps the most emerging way to help with remote health administration. I think it's breakthrough because chronic disease is here to stay. We're living through one of the greatest ages of longevity. Life expectancy from both men and women has gone up dramatically over the last 25 years, largely due to healthier habits, better interventional solutions in pharmacology, vaccines. But this pandemic is going to take its toll, downstream toll. And my prediction is it's going to reverse all of that. So we've got to take much more aggressive steps on long-term chronic care. So people who understand, and they don't have to be doctors, they may be those in informatics, data scientists, particularly data scientists, who understand disease trends and habits, who know how to nudge, and many of you are familiar with nudge theory, who know how to nudge people towards calling their healthcare physician, doing a remote consultation, nudging them towards better healthcare practices and exercise, is going to be, I think, the next generation of innovation. Finally, I'll go back to the final pillar, which is around the accelerating the development and manufacturing to scale of medicines, therapeutics, and vaccines. I think what we're seeing today, in any respect, is incredible in terms of therapies and vaccine development in a very short window of time. Because previously, development was classical phase 1 through phase 3, earlier trials on safety, later trials on efficacy, and then follow-up and so on. But we're seeing them in a highly compressed time frame. And what that puts is a great deal of stress on the system, but it's because we have to. I think the medical and research community feels we have to find solutions. And I think we've had great partners in the US government, the European governments, Gavi and others that have made these commitments for vaccines and therapies. Some will work very well and some will not. But it's I think we're living through this pandemic, and as a result, it's forced us into necessary urgent actions. But I think for those in clinical research who pick a career in that field, protein sciences, clinical research, and the administration of research, this is going to be, to me, here to stay, because there's been an opportunity cost as a result. We've moved and shifted tremendous amounts of value towards creation of vaccines and therapies, or discovering new uses like remdesivir from Gilead's drug, which was originally designed for Ebola, did not work very well, but does work clearly on the coronavirus, this particular coronavirus. But the very interesting thing is, how do we continue that surge of cyclical energy and innovation for drug development and manufacturing to scale, that we could do it at a more affordable cost, making our medicines more effective and more affordable. So I'd like to close with that. I hope I've defined over this journey of a pandemic in 10 months, 5 core areas I think are really so important, whether it's in the public health surveillance and analytics, it's in the testing and tracing and the quarantining and the measures we take in forming those registries, whether it's in the care delivery in hospitals and clinics and remote centers with infusion, whether it's in the recovery and the long-term chronic care that we do remotely. And finally, I think most importantly, I think through accelerated research and development and focused development to improve our our creation of interventional therapies, not just for the virus itself, but for associated conditions that I think have been neglected as a result. Zakir, I'll hand back to you for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, John, so much. So with that, I'd like Aaron to say a few words of thank you to John.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks, Zakir. Thanks, John, for that excellent presentation. And I think, to me, you really kind of connected some really important dots. I mean, we're all obviously, all of us are thinking about where we are in this pandemic. And so I thank you for educating us a little bit about some really important topics and really how they affect the innovation economy and where we're going. So thank you very much. What I think really came home to me in your presentation was just the synergy between industries. We had a healthcare industry summit last week. We had Dean Perry Halkitis from the Rutgers School of Public Health, who talked about some of the same topics from a very different perspective. And it just, it just reminds me that if we're really going to have innovation, we've got to bring people together from different perspectives and different backgrounds to solve some of these problems and challenges. So John, thank you very much for being with us. Pharmaceutical and biotech industry is so important to our innovation economy. So thank you for all of your leadership in that industry. And I know Haskell Berman from the Healthcare Institute of New Jersey is with us today. We really recognize how important the biopharmaceutical industry and industries are to our innovation economy. So thank you, John, and look forward to working with you and others in your industry to really build a skilled workforce to propel these kinds of innovations going forward. So thank you.
Thank you.